There are only two things that I really knew for certain as a child, almost as if via some kind of genetic memory, perhaps. Firstly, that the mystery school or hermetic order of Merlins is real. Those secret places where wizards learn their magic, copying as much down to their personal grimoires or magical notebooks as they find useful. Secondly, that there did exist some interdimensional, albeit invisible, entities allowing me realization when I entered adolescence, and I guess you're gonna have to brace yourself for this, that basically I am an elf. And of course I do not necessarily resemble contemporary vision of Santa Claus. Elves are the imaginary beings that most people conceive of in their minds, except for perhaps a model of J.R.R. Tolkien, who spent a great deal of time studying the ancient Elven tradition and languages in his research for his fantasy of Middle-earth. There is definitely an increasing interest in the Elven tradition as a result of fantasy products over the past years, and really there's no solid avenue for a seeker to explore the Elven tradition. Internet forums on the Elven ways and magic are filled mainly with unsolvable inquiries concerning where to find information on this topic. And while other resources sometimes dabble into aspects considered Elven or even the Celtic fairy tradition, they do have a tendency to fall short in establishing the grand legacy and significance that the Elven-Ffayrie race has played in human development. So this series is based off something that was written quite a few years ago by us when we were first developing some research into these areas for Mardukite Ministries. And it's called the Book of Elven-Fairie. And it should be understood that the Book of Elven-Fairie is no role-playing game, though it could be used to supplement one, nor is it intended as a companion really to fantasy literature, though again a secondary use. This is basically what we're going to do in this series is not for everybody. It's inclined to those who are drawn or inclined to the Elven way that have sought after it. The emergence of the New Age movement has definitely brought a revival of interest in elves and fairy beings and lore. Nature spirits in general. Until recently, though, the fairy section of Ye Olde New Age Shope contained really just A to Z encyclopedias, art books containing original works or pressed flowers, and manuals to guide the reader to the other world via, imagery and guided meditations and other mental upgrades of such. This is certainly not enough to base a tradition off of. And what's more, there are many misconceptions that continue to be reprinted in manuals of fairy Wicca, much of which really just contain rehashes of simple ritual magic and spellcraft mixed with a bit of Celtic history and the use of the Celtic pantheon of deities in the rituals. And while often employed with great success by magical practitioners with ceremonial skills, only a small portion of the actual story ends up being relayed to the reader. So it's not really my wish to speak ill of the work of others, since most of them have at least positively affected global consciousness and furthering mainstream awareness of mystical earthwork, ecological responsibility, the observation of solar festivals. So, fortunately, the Elven way has been carried on by a lineage of which is quite broad at this point, just as a tree branches out with an astronomical number of shoots as it matures. Much of the original knowledge is held by the hereditary genetic folk memory and practices of mystical family traditions and the passing down of innate gifts through generations, which has occurred completely separate from what is called, Wicca, which is really about 100 years old at best. We've often heard and read of the tradition and practices of the village folk witch who lived in a secluded portion of the forest working with their fairy gardens and herbal tinctures. But what of the wizard now? What of the mystic hermit in the forests, living in shanties, caves, and mountainsides? What of the true elvish druids and their secret histories kept long before the Dark Ages, when modern civilization was thrust into spiritual ignorance? Yes, maybe through this series, their story can finally be revealed.